Hi, I'm Tim Gabbett. Happy to be back with the Physical Performance Show. We're talking about progressing training loads and how we can build the unbreakable athlete.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to episode 295 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by PLOS world-leading GPS watches and heart rate monitors, and the Physical Performance Show's very own Patreon Learnings membership. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week, we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. We do this across a range of our different episodes: interest editions, coaches' corners, learnings catch-up episodes, featured performers, and our very popular expert editions. And off the back of last week's very popular expert edition with Associate Professor Max Paquette, which explored running surface interactions, we will keep the learnings coming your way. We've invited back another very popular former expert of the show from back on episode 151, high-performance consultant Dr. Tim Gabbett. And today you'll enjoy learnings around considerations for progressing training loads for adult athletes and also youth athletes, for both the injured athlete and the healthy athlete looking to improve. By way of bio, Dr. Tim Gabbett has over 25 years' experience working as an applied sports scientist with athletes and coaches from around the world. Dr. Tim Gabbett's experience is multidisciplinary, but it has one central theme, and that is high performance. Tim has consulted to world-leading sporting organisations and associations, including the NBA, Australian Rugby League, AFL, and the English Premier League. Dr. Tim Gabbett holds a PhD in Human Physiology and has completed a second PhD in Applied Sports Science. Tim has published over 250 peer-reviewed articles and presented at over 400 national and international conferences. In a recent study of 8 million scientists published in PLOS Biology, Tim was named in the top 25 most impactful sports scientists of all time. And perhaps most fittingly, well-known Australian Rugby League champion coach Wayne Bennett has this to say about Tim. There is a consistency around the way Tim operates. He works hard for the team. Day to day, you know he's going to give 100%. Dr. Gabbett shares around these concepts of tissue-specific loads and sport-specific capacity and training, and why it is that their interplay is so key for athletes looking to perform at their physical best or reduce the risk of injury. Dr. Gabbett also shares on this episode around training the specialised youth athlete and considerations and a model to keep them playing. There's a growing appreciation that specialising early with adolescent athletes in sport may produce some detriments to health and performance. Yet what do we do with the youth athlete who is and will specialise early? Well, Dr. Tim Gabbett has the answers. So strap in for a bucket load of learnings from this week's expert edition, brought to you by PLOS heart rate monitors and GPS watches with Dr. Tim Gabbett. Dr. Tim Gabbett, welcome back to the Physical Performance Show.
Thanks for having me, Brad. It's good to be back here.
It was March 2019 when you last featured, and you generously shared many learnings. It's been a very popular episode in the archives. You shared last time around this concept of training harder and smarter, and I know that hasn't been lost on many of the listeners. I've heard it even in the consulting room off the back of last episode. It recited back to me. But you haven't stopped there. You've still been prolific. It's 2 and a bit years on and the world has changed. So in a nutshell, what has Dr. Tim Gabbett been up to in the last 2.5 years?
Things have changed for everyone. we can focus on what COVID's taken away from us, but it's probably not too productive to do that. You go down a bit of a rabbit hole with dark thoughts if you do that. So, I've just tried to turn it around and focus on the things that it's given back to me. And one of the things it's given me is, it's given me a chance to write, and it's given me a chance to connect with people that are pretty important to me, reconnect. It's given me time with my family, and it's given me time to get consistent training in. And that's probably one of the things that I love most is the routine that I've got now with my training. I've been able to, it's got a pretty consistent schedule. So, there are negatives that have come with COVID, but, I think we can always turn it around and look at some positives that it's given us as well.
I shared in your bio the teams, the organisations that you've consulted to. There's in many ways barely a high-performance environment that you haven't directly consulted to or no doubt influenced. As you mentioned there, one of the things that you've been doing is your own training routine. And I've been impressed, Tim. When I think of Tim Gabbett, I don't immediately think of endurance machine because of that more of a strength-based background, but you've been doing fantastic things with your own park run time coming down quite a bit. I think it was your son that challenged you to it. Can you share a little bit about this? You've popped it on one of your great vlogs on YouTube and over on Instagram, and the latest one being the training for endurance performance. So tell us what you've managed to do, Tim.
Yeah, well, look, my son's he's been great. We travelled to Europe together just as COVID was hitting. We were in Europe, so everywhere we went, it felt like the borders were being shut behind us. It felt like we were being chased by COVID. We got back to Brisbane, and he started running. He started doing something that he wanted to do for a while. We started running together, doing a few runs together, and the next thing he's challenged me to a park run race, and it's become an annual event now. It is bigger. It's as bigger than the Olympics. The way he set it up, there's a number of little challenges in there, and there's growth challenges in there as well for us to help each other along. Yeah, you mentioned that I've got a strength background. Realistically, my background before the strength background was more of an endurance background. I often joke that I was born with 100% slow twitch fibers. I just wish I had one fast twitch fiber. So the strength work I was doing was really just to be able to help out, the collision sport, team sport athletes I was working with. And for me to not get ragdolled too much when we were doing the wrestling and the grappling. I could do the running okay, but I still needed to wrestle and grapple with some of these guys and without being broken in half. So that's why I needed to do some strength and power work. But a long time before that, running and the longer the run, the better for me, really. That was my thing. So to get back into it wasn't too difficult because I always had that training history of cross countries and middle and long distance track work. So now I've just kind of changed my focus a little bit. I've still got the strength power work in my own training, but I've increased my running volume. I'm doing some anaerobic capacity work. I'm doing some VO2 work where I'm doing longer efforts and shorter intervals. So yeah, there's been some really good improvements on the back of it. It's good to know you can still improve even as you get a bit older. So
I know you cited that was one of your real drivers aside from your son's challenge and this annual parkrun race, but was to not die wondering. It's a bit of a maxim of yours, Tim, but you wanted to see how much you could improve as we all are maturing. And you've managed to drop it down to, I think, on latest look there, 1851 from, being sort of stuck, if you like, in the mid-20s or thereabouts for several years in a row. So it's a great example. And as we all know, Tim, there's always faster runners than everyone pretty much on the planet. You can always find someone. But the reason we all do it is we love seeing what's within ourselves. So well done. And I do recommend everyone checks out that vlog. It was a great example. You pop your program in there, Tim, and a few of the highlights there are this concept of training high and low and optimizing recovery, and also your tissue work, which we'll talk about today, but the strength and conditioning. So seemingly you're leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think I've said this before, and you mentioned it as well. I don't want to die wondering, and as my old man says, he says a lot, you can't kick goals when you're sitting in the grandstand. And so, if you want to make a difference somewhere in your life to people, or if you want to do something in your life, you can't just think about it and you can't just talk about it. You've got to actually get in and do it. And yeah, to me, it's those park runs. You're racing yourself, but even in my mind, I am racing someone out there. Even if they don't realise they're racing me, I know I'm racing them. So it's been a good challenge just to keep my head straight as well.
Yeah, well done. And Tim, as you said, it's given you time. This COVID era has given you time to write, and that you have been doing. One of the recent publications that was referenced by Jason Torrey, US-based physical therapist, who featured on episode 287, Mastering the Middle Distance Runner. And Jason referenced your paper titled When Progressing Training Loads, What Are the Considerations for Healthy and Injured Athletes, that you authored with Igor Sancho, Bart Dinnigan and Richard Willey. It was an editorial. And Jason referenced the concept of sports-specific load-in and then tissue-specific load-in. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for you to explain this paper and why it's got so many important practical applications to practitioners in the field and scientists, etc.
Yeah, sure. Look, I didn't realise Jason had referenced that paper, and I know Jason. We met at one of my workshops in Boston, and he's a really, really smart guy, great guy, and anyone to talk about middle distance running, you got the right fellow there. He's forgotten more about it than a lot of people know. So, he's a good guy to have a listen to. Yeah, well, look, the concept of that paper was really around, what we see in practice. Sometimes there's a gap between early stage rehab and return to peak performance. And what we hear commonly when players break down, athletes break down, is the physical therapy staff will say to the strength and conditioning guys or girls, you train them too hard. And then the strength and conditioning people will come back and say, no, you didn't train them hard enough. And the reality is they're probably both right. Somewhere in the middle, in that reconditioning phase, the process breaks down. And probably the take-home point from that paper is local tissue loading alone, the stuff that you do in early stage rehab, is really important, but it's not going to be enough to return an athlete to peak performance. And sport-specific loading, while it may help you with the task at hand of competing in sport, you can have sport-specific capacity, but you may not necessarily have good local tissue health. It's not an either-or approach. The combination of both is what's going to get your athlete back to peak performance and keep them there. And I think that's probably the key take-home with that paper is we need to work together. It's not we only do local tissue loading and then send them back to sport, or we only train really, really hard and then think that we've got all the local tissue health covered. The combination of both is what's going to give you the best chance of keeping that athlete performing and give them a chance of remaining injury-free.
If we think in terms of the running world, certainly as a practitioner in the field, it's a misconception by many endurance runners of most levels, beginners through to sub-elite and even elite, recreationally competitive and recreational, that running alone, so that sport-specific activity, confers tissue health. Runners will often say when they've developed a calf strain or an Achilles tendinopathy or a plantar fascia challenge, shouldn't my calves be strong enough? I run all the time. And it's then a matter of educating them. So I guess that's an example of why this paper is important.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the mistakes I've made in my own programming over the years, it's probably the fact that I focus so much on sport-specific loading and I've neglected local tissue health. So even, if we go back to my own training now, it's all relative, but I do a fair bit of running now. But that's not the only thing I do to maintain local tissue health. I have to really think about, what are the things that are limiting my performance? Where is my performance going to be limited? And where are the potential weak links in what I want to achieve? So, you have to be pretty honest with yourself and look at the things that you probably don't like doing much. And typically they'll be the things that are the problem areas. And I don't think there's too many runners that would not benefit from having stronger calves. or whether it's, having some glute strength or control. The things that you typically don't like doing, the things that seem a little boring, could be the things that allow you to handle the higher level stuff. They allow you to handle the sport-specific loading better, which allows you to compete a lot better.
So true. I often say, Tim, it's the tax that athletes have to pay to enjoy the sport-specific stuff. I've had a sequelae of bone stress injuries, about 6 or 7 in the femoral shaft since about 2013, Tim, despite best efforts to monitor my workload and optimize everything that's important for the skeleton. So I don't enjoy getting in the gym and doing heavy squats and heavy deadlifts and plyometrics, but we know these things confer health to the skeleton. So there's my tax being paid most weeks.
Yeah.
It's another example, I guess.
If you're one of those people who don't like lifting heavy and you don't really want to look at it from an injury prevention point of view, look at it from the point of view that strength and power work has been shown to improve performance. Even as small as it's a moderate effect, but even if we just think about it in terms of improving running economy, there's evidence to say that it'll improve performance. So, maybe you don't look at it from this is the boring stuff that I don't even know if it's working. Think of it as this is actually going to help me run faster, or it's going to make me run more efficiently. That's a different way of looking at it and going, well, I'm getting a performance effect out of it. Yeah,
we'd all do anything legal to optimize performance, right? So flick the switch. Tim, just by definition on this local tissue health or local tissue loading, what's the definition of that?
Well, we talk about local tissue capacity in terms of a structure's ability or a tissue's ability, a specific structure, a specific tissue's ability to withstand tissue or structure-specific load. And when I talk about local tissue health and the kind of training that we do for that, it could be as simple as, for a baseball pitcher, we're trying to improve the strength of the external rotators of the shoulder, or in a running-based sport, a team sport, or a sport where you have to run fast. It could be as simple as improving the health of the hamstrings by doing isolated hamstring exercises. So that's our local tissue capacity loading, our local tissue health.
And then sport-specific capacity, definition of that, Tim?
Sport-specific capacity, I'd define, and I think we define it in the paper, as the ability to tolerate sport-specific loading, training and competition, to handle the demands of competition, or to tolerate and actually to perform and thrive in those demands of competition. So one is looking at an isolated tissue or structure's ability to tolerate load, and the sport-specific capacity is looking more at the sport-specific demands, sprinting, repeated collisions, being able to perform over the duration of a long race or a long event. That's the sport-specific demands.
And as you said, Tim, in the example of a rehabilitating athlete, that middle ground, the gap between optimal performance and local tissue loading, so you've strained a calf, you're doing calf strengthening exercises, or a hamstring, it's very real and it's hard to cross. And I think what hopefully is encouraging to people is that even in high-performance sporting environments like you've lived your professional life around, as you mentioned at the start, one camp will say you didn't push them hard enough and the other will say you trained them too hard. So for the individuals out there outside of those high-performance environments, it can be a challenging gap to bridge. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, I think part of the challenge is if you're not in pro sport and you have someone come to you into your clinic, there's a disconnect between what's happening in the clinic and when they go back to their sport. So sometimes you don't even get to communicate as a physical therapist with the strength and conditioning coach or the sports coach at the end point, the sport. You're trying to create a rehab program that gets them back to sport, but you don't have the link there. So you're kind of trying to do everything along that chain, and without communication to the person at the end point, be it the sports coach or the strength and conditioning coach, you don't know whether they've trained hard enough because you don't know what they're about to do. You've got no idea what that coach has in mind for them. So that is a challenge. I think the best way that we can picture it is not thinking of them as two very distinct ends of a spectrum. Think of them as running in parallel. So as you're doing local tissue loading, there's going to be certain sport-specific tasks that you can't do, but there's going to be a heap of sport-specific tasks that you can do. So what you want to try and do is find ways to maintain sport-specific capacity while you're doing your local tissue loading. Don't let sport-specific capacity fall to the basement while you have an injured athlete. So you can do your local tissue loading. We can do our rehab, but we also can do little circuits. They may not be able to do high-intensity running or sprinting, but maybe they can do other circuit-related tasks, and they can do this on their own around their injury, so without exacerbating the injury, but then maintaining sport-specific capacity while you're restoring local tissue loading. And when you get to the other end, when sport-specific loading takes on a greater emphasis, it doesn't mean that all the local tissue loading drops off. You can still maintain local tissue loading while you're doing sport-specific training. An example of this is we do sprinting as an example of sport-specific loading, but there's also occasions during the week where we might do eccentric loading, such as our Nordics or other eccentric exercises to maintain the health of the tissue, to maintain the strength of the tissue. And that helps us to maintain our sport-specific capacity as well. It helps us to tolerate that sport-specific task.
All with the aim of having the athlete perform and withstand the demands of their respective sport. I think that's key.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're not just adding load for the sake of adding load. Anyone can make someone tired. Like I can grab any drunk off the street and out of the local pub to make someone tired. But it's about creating a stimulus that creates an appropriate amount of fatigue to get the adaptation that we want. So, yeah, I don't see any real value in just loading for the sake of loading.
It's almost that reverse engineering concept. What are the demands? Let's make sure there's the local tissue characteristics required and the sport-specific training to output.
Absolutely. And that's whenever I work with a sport, that's exactly what I'll do is I'll work my way backwards from that. What are the demands of the sport? What are the physical qualities required? So local and sport-specific capacities, and what are the factors that are limiting performance on an individual basis? So if you have someone who can run fast but can't repeat it, then you might have to bump up their motor a bit. You might have to give them some aerobic work. If you have someone who's aerobically fit but is slow and needs some strength work, then you bump up those areas. And ideally what that does is feeds back to improve the physical qualities, which then improves your ability to handle the demands of the sport, to perform the demands of the sport.
Running in parallel, Tim. An example of someone working on local tissue health, say a rehabilitating athlete, and still looking at including some sport-specific capacity work might be, just to illustrate, Tim, a runner with a recently diagnosed bone stress injury that at the right time can still get on the bike and do a bit of cross-training for their cardiovascular system. Obviously, they're not impact loading with running, but that's an example at a very simple level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. At the right time, that's an example. If you could do some body weight circuits with that particular athlete. So if you have a runner with, let's say, a runner with a tendinopathy, the same thing could happen. You could find different ways to load to keep the cardiovascular system ticking over, keep the aerobic energy system. We don't want to see that detrain to the point where they fall to the basement. Keep that ticking over while you're restoring the health of the bone or restoring the health of the tendon.
You're listening to episode 295 of The Physical Performance Show with Dr. Tim Gabbett, high performance consultant, discussing training progression considerations for adult and youth athletes. Support for today's show comes from Polar. Polar are a sports technology company who build world-class heart rate monitors and GPS watches for people who take their health, fitness, and sports performance seriously. Polar have an incredible heritage. Headquartered in Finland, they have been the global driving force behind scientific wearables for 4 decades. They are the pioneers in and the world leaders in heart rate measurement technology. Coming from the heart of the Nordics, Polar have the experience, insight, and history of quality, design, and innovation which is unparalleled. Polar is worn by some of the best athletes on the planet. And recently, Polar released their new range of high-performance watches, the Polar Grit X Pro range. True to Polar's heritage, the Grit X Pro range will come in 3 stunning colours, including Nordic Copper, Arctic Gold, Black Diamond, and the Titan, a premium edition that's ultra strength, made from lightweight aerospace titanium, equipping you with one of the most beautiful and durable outdoor watches on the market. And the Polar team have generously offered up to 15% off selected products by using the code TPPS over at polar.com. If you are in the market for your next GPS watch, look no further than Polar's range. Support for today's show also comes from the Physical Performance Show's very own Learnings membership. It's simple. If you would like to support the production of the show, then you can do so over on Patreon from $5 per month. In return, we'll grant you complimentary access to our back catalogue of live stream events, including Dr. Stephen Seiler and Dr. Shona Halson, and most recently, acclaimed sports dietitian and author Rinny McGregor, who recently presented a live stream event fueling the endurance athlete. So jump over to Patreon, search for the Physical Performance Show, and there you can pledge your support from just $5 per month. Support for today's show also comes from Pogo Physio's online consultations. If you are an endurance athlete struggling with bone, tendon, or joint-related concerns, then our 45-minute online consultations used by endurance athletes worldwide can help get you back to your physical best. To schedule your 45-minute online consult, jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth, and there you can schedule with myself or any of the Pogo Physio team. And here's a recent success story from Sarah, Tasmanian-based recreationally competitive triathlete who overcame some persistent bone stress concerns with her foot.
Hey, I'm Sarah. I'm a competitive age group triathlete from Australia, and telehealth 100% works. I did telehealth with Brad for chronic sesamoiditis, and I didn't need any hands-on treatment. I had exercise prescription and load management with my training, and this, along with Brad's expertise and genuine care, got me across my Pogo finish line.
Thanks, Sarah. For now, let's jump back with this week's Expert Edition, episode 295, Dr. Tim Gabbett, high-performance consultant, discussing training progression considerations for adults and youth athletes. Tim, I guess the golden question is, we've identified the importance of running in parallel with this local tissue health plus sport-specific loading or capacity work, but how to progress? It's the age-old question. It's the title of the paper. When progressing training loads, what are the considerations? So the big question is, how do we monitor? How do we know when to progress? It's tricky, right?
This is probably where we're at the moment in terms of the limitations of where the technology and where the research is at and what we can actually do in the field. So there's ways that we can measure different forces, we can measure different loads in the lab with sophisticated equipment. And when you instrument an athlete, we can do that in the lab. It hasn't quite got to the field yet, and not entirely to the field. So things that we want to measure in the field, we just can't do at the moment. And it'll be the same in the clinic, where a lot of this equipment you just don't have in the clinic, and it hasn't made its way to the clinic yet. So we know that we need to apply progressive overload. The cheapest way that we can quantify that is through a session RPE. But then the question becomes, well, session RPE is typically used to monitor global loads, or sport-specific loading it's commonly used to quantify. I don't know that it's sensitive enough to quantify local tissue loading, and I don't know any particular study that's done it yet. Maybe that's to come to see whether it is actually capable of doing that. Maybe the session RPE just requires a slight modification of the question. So rather than how hard was that session, you could change it slightly to how hard was that session on your and just insert the tissue. You know, how hard was it on your calf? How hard was it on your knee? But again, I don't know. I have some questions over whether it's sensitive enough to quantify that local tissue load. So it's very hard to quantify the external loads because the technology just hasn't got from the lab to the field or the lab to the clinic. And then we're limited by what the session RPE can actually do. We just don't know how sensitive it is for local tissue loading. So we really need to consider a whole heap of other things like the pain and the fear of movement. We need to look at the sensitivity of the tissue. We need to look at our athletes' beliefs when it comes to loading. So there's a whole heap of extra information that we're trying to use other than just load when we decide to progress load. And that comes down to clinical reasoning. I guess that's really what it comes down to, is you use your clinical reasoning skills to decide, is this athlete ready to try something a little bit harder? And if we try something a little bit harder and the response isn't great, then we might just have to sensibly regress load a little bit before we decide to progress again.
It's a big algorithm, and as you say, Tim, it's hard to quantify the local tissue loads accurately in clinics such as My Daily Environment. Although there are some great tools available now, there's a range of different things that we certainly have available these days compared to, say, a decade ago, which do allow us to get some measures of tissue health. One thing that I think we do all day, every day, is exactly what you just said, is reason. Can we progress this patient athlete? What are the things we're listening to? You use a term in the paper, psychological resilience. That's a great little term. What do you mean by that, Tim?
Different athletes have different experiences. And when you talk about patients, I'm talking about patients. Athletes and patients are the same thing. But
totally.
Their beliefs, their experiences, they all sort of come together to determine where that athlete is at this point in time, and their perception of pain, their perception of whether that pain is something that they can overcome or something that is debilitating and that is going to cause them more troubles. So psychological resilience is you'll know who the people are who are fearful of movement and want to avoid movement or want to avoid loading because it's they feel it's going to damage their body. And then the trick then is to work with those athletes, to educate them a little, to challenge this, challenge in a good way their views, and help them understand that they're not as vulnerable as they think they are, that they're stronger than they think they are, that they're not just going to break. And part of that is setting, I think goal setting, just small goals. When they achieve their goals and they feel a little bit stronger as a result of that, that starts to build a little bit of resilience. Resilience is just your ability to bounce back after an insult, whatever that insult is. So if it's a physical insult, even if it's a small one, and they've bounced back okay, and they're feeling a little sore, and you say that's normal, that's good. All it tells us is you've done something, and you're still walking around, and you're still getting up the stairs. Good on you. You're doing great. We're going to try it again, and I bet you don't feel anywhere near as sore the next time. So it's just about trying to help. Everyone's got it in them. Yep. It's just a matter of trying to push the right buttons to help bring it out, and that's what our role of in science trained professions is. It's not what we put in the body. It's what we bring out of the body for them, and that's a big thing for us, I think, is helping those athletes regain a bit of belief and a bit of trust in their body
and confidence, which is so quickly diminished in the case of an injury or an insult. Tim, an example of that session RPE, Tim, I think it might just give a good picture to listeners, would be something with, say, a home program or a gym-based strength and conditioning program off the back of an injury, say an Achilles tendon issue. One thing that I like to use in the clinic is when people, you might not see them for a month, Tim, if they're out there, doing their programs working on tissue health and sport-specific loading, and they wonder when they can progress. So something as simple as your session RPE needs to be at least a 5 out of 10 as you're performing these exercises at all times. People get that. It's simple. It's not a necessarily overly scientific way to progress, but at least it's some way of measuring the internal load, the work rate.
Yeah. Look, I think that's they can see that they've got to be working hard. If everything is a 1 or a 2 out of 10, then they've got to. You want them to actually be feeling like something is a little bit hard to do. If it was easy, then everyone would be doing it, and if it was easy, chances are you're not going to get any better. So you just have to be prepared to push a little bit. I think a part of it is, and this is not so much effort, but it's more pain, is understanding the difference between good pain and bad pain.
Yep.
The good pain is you get a little bit of a tingling first, and then a little bit of a burning in the legs. Then and it goes away once you stop. Then that's actually not a that's something that you should try and look for in those harder sessions. But if you feel a sharp pain that doesn't go away, then maybe that's something that you need to have a closer look at. And the soreness that you feel in the 24 hours post, does it feel like it's a little bit of tightness? Does it feel like you can still walk up the stairs, but you're feeling it in both legs? Rather than localized to the injured tissue site. Then that's probably a good thing as well. That's you kind of want to look for that pain, chase that kind of pain, because it's just DOMS. It's just normal, and what you're experiencing there is exactly the same as an elite level athlete. So you're somewhere on that athletic spectrum with them. Yeah. And the more you refer to these people as athletes rather than patients. Patients implies that they're sick, that they need to get better. Athletes is you're an athlete and we want to get you back to performing your athletic tasks, whatever that looks like for you. If it's carrying your groceries up a few flights of stairs, that's an athletic task, and that's what we want you to be able to do. We want you to be able to do it without having to collapse on the couch for 3 hours afterwards. So, the more we can promote that athletic type thinking, I think that's a positive spin on an injury and pain as well. Yeah.
It's powerful language. Words matter, don't they, Tim? I think there's definitely a growing awareness and appreciation of local tissue-specific loading, certainly amongst the endurance world. Would you agree that there seems to be a real recognising of the importance of strength and conditioning, not just for hopefully injury minimisation? Obviously, there's still work to be done in the science there, but in the literature, but certainly in improving performance, like you've already referenced. There's many athletes now, recreational age group, that will incorporate some tissue-specific work into their weekly regimes.
Yeah, and I think you'd be crazy not to be honest. If you want to improve performance, you want to give yourself a chance of being the best you can be at whatever sport, then you want to get the balance right. And I think the good programs have a good balance of high-low type training, polarized training. They have a good balance of local tissue and sport-specific loading. I just wish I had known this when I was, a 17 or 16-year-old kid, because I think these kind of things and the way we can modulate volume and intensity in our training, I would have loved to have known that 30-odd years ago. Yeah, I think it would have been great.
We recently featured Tim Alistair Brownlee, dual Olympic triathlon champion, on a featured performer episode. And Alistair actually referenced something similar, that when he was prior to the London Olympics 1920, he is a very learned athlete who would look at the literature and look at the works of someone like a Dr. Stephen Seiler, and he actually devised in his mind and opinion what was really a world sort of first way of approaching endurance sports such as triathlon at the time, where many were just going out and flogging every session. And that was, he said, he looked at the demands and it was an efficiency sport, Tim. and he realised that he needs to be more efficient, so he needs to make his hard sessions even harder and do as much volume and aerobic work either side of that as he can at low intensity to help aid that efficiency. That's simple. 2 gold medals later, he delivered.
Yeah, I think it's a great approach. Make your hard sessions harder and your easy sessions easier. And I think a lot of people, and me included, probably don't pay enough, or didn't. I know I didn't pay enough attention to the low intensity work. So if I'm going for a long run, I used to always try and do it, as if it was a long run, still at a reasonable pace. Try and make it a quick long run. But now I don't even look at the watch. I'll have it because I'm monitoring volume, but I don't actually care too much whether I'm above or below 5-minute K pace. So yesterday I went for a long run and it was really slow, but I had it in my mind that the slower the better. It's on those slow days I really have to, or the easier days, listen to my body and just let the body just dictate the pace. On the hard days though, I really have to tighten my focus up, and in my mind I've got to get my head around the fact that I'm going to be running fast for the intervals that I'm doing. They might be short recovery, and I'm going to be in a bit of a pit, and I have to back myself to fight my way out of it. And that's the mindset I've got to take to those hard sessions. So you can see there's 2 very different mindsets. One's, okay, it's a relaxed mindset, take as long as you like to get through it. The other one is you might have to bury yourself here, get your head around it. It's going to hurt, but you've got to get your head around it to win that session. So slightly different mindsets, but it ties into that polarised approach to training.
You're listening to Dr. Tim Gabbett, high performance consultant, on this expert edition discussing training progression considerations for adults and youth athletes. Now, on last week's expert edition, we explored running surface interactions with Associate Professor Max Paquette. The episode has created quite the chatter as it explored and debunked many of the myths that runners hold near and dear about surface interactions. Are soft surfaces truly better? So here's a little snippet of Max Paquette sharing from episode 294.
There is a risk of maybe rolling your ankle and then contributing to the damage of the bone, potentially, depending on how you do it or, what's happening. The other thing is that, muscle forces contribute to loading a bone, right? Compressing a bone and even bending the bone a little bit. There's some good research on some modeling studies that are able to model the amount of compressive force being applied to a bone and how much of that compressive force comes from the muscles themselves, the muscle tension pulling the bone, essentially.
So if you happen to miss Max Paquette last week, do jump back. There is a bucket load of learnings to be had and practical takeaways to implement into your own training or coaching or practice. Whilst there, peruse the archives dating right back to episode 1 featuring surf life-saving Ironman champion Ali Day, or perhaps you want to check out the back catalogue with Dr. Tim Gabbett, episode 151, where Tim discussed why athletes need to be training smarter and harder, and you can do so over on YouTube or any of the podcast players. For now, let's jump back with Dr. Tim Gabbett discussing training progression considerations for adult and youth athletes. Tim, shifting gears, this year you also outputted another editorial about training the specialised youth athlete. Let's just explore that for a moment. What is the specialised youth athlete, Tim?
Well, there's different ways to define it, and that's probably the challenge. But let's just call a specialised athlete as someone who trains and competes close to year round in the same sport, and it's 8 months or longer in the same sport, without having a rest, without trying a different sport, just focusing solely on that sport. It's become a major issue because whether it's parents, whether it's coaches, whether it's elite academies, driving athletes to spend more time in their sport on the assumption that spending more time from an earlier age actually makes you better at that sport. Now, the problem is there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that that's the case. I'm sure there will be examples of athletes who've specialised early and have gone on to become elite at that particular sport, but there's not research evidence to suggest that it's any better than sampling a lot of sports in your developmental years. So that's part of the argument is, does specialisation actually early specialisation result in elite level performance later on? And the evidence doesn't suggest that that's the case. It doesn't suggest it's not the case. It's just that there's no evidence to say that it's actually fact. But the challenge is that the kids are specialising early all the time, and there will be some athletes who specialise early who don't experience negative outcomes. That actually do go on and they get better and better and better, and they're not suffering injuries, they're not suffering burnout. So is there a way that we can support those athletes to actually, if they want to specialise early, because some still want to specialise early irrespective of what the evidence says.
Yeah.
So is there a way to support those athletes and help them achieve their goals? That's the crux of that paper.
It intuitively makes sense to any aspiring young. I think of myself as a 10-year-old discovering triathlon. I wouldn't have listened to anyone if they had said, you may perform better in your adulthood years if we throw a bit of this in, a bit of that in. I dropped tennis, I dropped soccer, I dropped everything and just picked up triathlon full-time in terms of my sporting pursuits for 10 to 20 years of age as a junior, whether it's the athlete, as you say, or coaches. But it's hard to not imagine that specialising early and dropping other sports and not sampling, as you said, could not improve performance in later years. Intuitively, we think of the 10,000-hour rule or for skilled sports, but it's, I guess, some of the reasons why it may not be helpful. Do you want to share a few of those, Tim?
Probably one of the key ones comes from movement experiences. The rationale is that if you can participate in a wide range of sports that involve a wide range of different movements, then you have more movement experiences. And the idea is that greater range of movement experiences actually provides a protective effect against injury. The flip side of that is if you experience a small range of movements, let's say you're a baseball pitcher and you're throwing over and over again, the variation in those movements is so small that they become highly repetitive, which is thought to contribute to overuse injury. There's some evidence to say that in team sports, if you can sample from a wide range of sports, so you don't just play basketball, you play Australian football and you play netball and you play a wide range of invasion sports, that those different experiences actually improve decision-making ability as well. So there may be a transfer effect, so that if you're a good hockey player, field hockey player, then that may actually transfer across to good soccer ability, the ability to read the play and make good decisions in soccer. So there's a few different advantages, I guess, of sampling a wide range of sports, particularly in those formative years before maturation, before skeletal maturation, before puberty. And typically what we see is athletes don't, at least from the AFL, for example, if you look at expert decision makers in the AFL, they didn't specialise any earlier than the non-experts. In fact, they had quite similar experiences to non-experts. It's only around puberty, around 13, 14, 15, where they started to specialise more in AFL-specific training and competition. And it's thought that these wide range of experiences, a heap of backyard games, actually improves decision-making ability as well. And, it tends to tie in with, what we hear about the best decision-makers in our team sports from years ago. They grew up playing backyard footy.
A lot of it for this next generation with COVID years, Tim. Look out, all the great decision makers. It's you mentioned the skeletal health component. It's it's widely known in clinical circles that window of development in adolescence for the health of the skeleton, the bone geometry, the bone density is where this multidirectional sampling, multidirectional loading, such as being on a basketball court or running around on a football field with your mates is so great for the athlete that does in later years want to, say, pursue endurance sports such as running or triathlon in terms of their skeletal health. So, but it's not always possible. There's time limits for busy parents. There's time limits for talented young aspiring athletes. So the specialisation pathway just seems to happen. And so that's why this paper, this editorial, I think is so important about how to support them. So what are the tips on how to support these specialised youth athletes?
I think one of them is quantifying what they do. So how many hours are they spending in training versus competition? Try and minimise the competition to training ratio. Ideally, you should probably spend more time in those developmental years, spend more time preparing for the sport rather than playing the sport. And once you start competing more than training, that can be a problem. Try not to increase load, be it training or competition, during periods of growth. So if you notice that your child has really shot up in the last month or two, then just try and hold their training loads pretty consistent. And the last one is just keep an eye on the response to load. There's a lot of different stresses that can contribute to burnout, particularly at that age. So, and with the different challenges with social media and with school and with all the different challenges that young athletes have, it's not just the training and competition that can lead to a lack of enjoyment or motivation for a sport. There can be other stresses, be it school or whatever, that can contribute to that. So just try and manage those stresses as much as you can. If they're going through academic stress, be it exam periods, then don't bump up the training load during those periods. Try and plan your training and competition schedule around those key dates in their academic calendar as well.
That's great. Just to recap, keep an eye on their response to load. Be mindful that we're not just talking about the activities they're doing, we're also talking about the non-visible things such as academic stress. Tim, try and not increase loads too much during periods of growth. And then firstly there you mentioned, Tim, quantify what they do in hours, training and competition, and be mindful that their competition hours don't outstrip their preparation hours or their training hours. Your paper gives a very practical, easy to remember outlines one, Tim, which was that limiting the total number of weekly train hours to no more than a child's age could be one strategy. How simple? Yeah,
I mean, that's something that's been recommended for quite a while. And it is a simple approach. Just don't train any more than your years. And look, we've expanded on that editorial. There's a special issue that's coming out in Sports Health on training the adolescent athletes. So if any of your listeners are interested in adolescent athletes, and what I'm finding is there's a lot of people out there that are interested in training for adolescent athletes, that will be a great resource. It's got papers on the relationship between load and injury. It's got weightlifting and some guides for resistance training and weightlifting for adolescent athletes. It's got monitoring sections. There's a whole heap and a whole topic on early specialisation. So there's probably something for everyone in that special issue. It will come out very, very shortly, either by the end of the year or early next year.
So keep an eye out for that. Sports Health.
Sports Health.
Yeah, brilliant. Dr. Tim Gabbett, you're always very generous with your sharings and knowledge. So thank you for your contribution today. Back in March 2019, you were issued a physical challenge for the week. What is Dr. Tim Gabbett's physical challenge to the listeners going to be for October 2021?
I think last time I did the Circuit of Death, if I remember correctly. So that was a gym-based program. So this one I'm going to do for the runners, seeing we've had a bit of a running theme. I'm going to give you a long effort a long effort, short rest set. And it's only 20 minutes of work. So the idea is it's geared towards improving your 5 kilometre time. What you have to do is 1 4 minute, 2 by 3 minutes, 3 by 2 minutes, and 4 by 1 minute. And each effort, you have to halve the rest. So it's a 2-to-1 work-rest ratio. So if you do a 4-minute effort, you get 2 minutes rest. 3-minute effort, you get 90 seconds rest, and so on. Your goal is to, in those intervals, is to hit the race pace that you want to maintain for a 5 kilometre race. So you want to hit the race pace or better. Ideally, if you have a goal of doing 4-minute kilometre pace, or what's that, 6-minute mile pace roughly, then you want to try and get below that if you can. Aim for 10 seconds below that pace. If you can get 10 seconds or greater below that pace, then you're going to be pretty close to hitting your goal race time. So there's your goal. 20 minutes of total work, 10 minutes of recovery period, and you can walk those recovery periods if you like, but you've got to hammer pretty hard in those intervals.
You've got to train harder and smarter. So it's 1 by 4 minutes, 2 by 3 minutes, 3 by 2 minutes, 4 by 1 minute, with halving of the rest period. So if it's a 4-minute bout, then you've got a 2-minute recovery period. We can let you know how we go with that, Tim. You're still obviously active there on Twitter at Tim Gabbett. You are also now you also now have the train smarter and harder workshop online, which is fantastic. 4 by 4 hour sessions, I believe, over concurrent or thereabouts weekend. So when's the next intake becoming available for that?
Look, the one that would be I'd recommend if you're looking to do something online is the on-demand one, and you just go to gabbettperformance.com. It allows you to study at your own pace. It's like a resource. It's like a textbook that you have on your computer the whole time. So whenever you want it, it's there. You can go back and rewatch the clips. You can take the quizzes. There's practical activities. So that'd be the one I recommend. The other good thing is with international travel opening up, there will be live workshops, face-to-face workshops in the US in February. So keep an eye out. New York is a definite, and there'll be a few other locations that will pop up that we'll announce shortly too.
Exciting. Tim, back in 2019, we asked you about the unbreakable athlete. I suspect your mindset hasn't changed. It's still possible, right?
Yeah, well, look, I don't know if it's possible, but I believe, but in my mind, that's what I'm always aiming towards. And in fact, unless you've got that mentality to put yourself in the car park and ready to fight for a little bit, then you probably won't get there. But if you've got that mindset, you're going to be pretty hard to break. If people want to break you, they can come and have a go. But the car park brawler always picks himself up off the canvas and goes again. So in that respect, I really believe we should be aiming towards developing the unbreakable athlete.
Yeah, brilliant. Isn't that why we all do what we do? It's an overarching belief.
Well, I think it should be. I think we want our athletes to play. We want them to go for the win rather than not lose. So that's the kind of mindset we've got to. If our athletes are showing us that and we can't come to them with a different mindset. We can't come to the mindset of we don't want you to break. We've got to come with the mindset of you are going to be strong. You are going to be resilient. You're going to handle anything this game throws at you or this sport throws at you. And I'm behind you 100%, but you're not going to need me because you've got this. You've got it won. We've got to be strong in the language we use. That's the approach I think we should be taking. Don't be fearful. Don't be worried about things that may never happen. Think about the good things that are going to happen when we get it right.
Wise words. What a place to end there too, Tim. Thank you once again for your contribution, Dr. Tim Gabbett.
Pleasure, Brad. All the best.
So there you have it, another episode of The Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know you took some great learnings from Dr. Gabbett's sharings today. Now, if you did, as always, jump over and let our guests know what it was that you enjoyed or took away. You'll find Dr. Tim Gabbett readily available over on the socials. Gabbett Tim, GABBETTIM, Gabbett Tim over on Instagram. And do also make a point of jumping over to YouTube, subscribing to Tim's research vlog. They are wonderful ways of progressing and optimizing our learnings. I'm subscribed. I watch these vlogs and they are excellent. And I highly recommend Tim's by demand online course, Training Smarter and Harder, the workshop. We'll have all the links over in the show notes over at pogophysio.com.au. Team, keep the podsies coming. A screenshot of the episode that you're enjoying, tagging in the show at Physical Performance Show. We'll reshare those, and they are always a whole lot of fun. As are iTunes reviews. We read them all, and if you've been enjoying the show, please take the time, or at least consider leaving one over on iTunes. It helps us enormously. Talking about feedback, it's our annual feedback time of the year. So if you jump over to the bio link at Physical Performance Show on Instagram, there you can take the 3-minute survey on what we can do to improve the show, and also let us know what you've been enjoying, and go into the draw to win a $50 Amazon gift card to be drawn on the 30th of November 2021. A massive thanks, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible each and every week and have done so from episode 1. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin, show administration, Matthew Olding, show graphic design. Once again, a massive thank you to today's show sponsor, Polar. Really, if you are looking for your next GPS watch or a heart rate monitor, don't look past Polar. Remember, you can use the code TPPS over at checkout, polar.com, for up to 15% off selected products. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we are on a learnings roll. So let's not stop. And next week, we will explore one of the most pesky and annoying of all running-related injuries, that is kneecap pain, otherwise known as patellofemoral pain. Now, it has been over 3 years since we explored this topic, and the field of research and best practice moves on. So next week, you'll be learning from Dr. Brad Neal, UK-based physiotherapist, who will be bringing us up to speed around best practices and current thinking on how to tackle this pesky and annoying running-related injury. Here's a little snippet of what you'll enjoy next week.
If a runner's demonstrating a significant overstride, if they're landing with a foot well ahead of their knee joint rather than the foot planting nicely underneath the centre of mass, I think there's a role there for some manipulation of cadence, definitely. But in the same as all of these other interventions, to see if it changes the severity of their symptoms. You know, I would be hesitant to say that run retraining has got the ability to prevent PFP because those data aren't there. And there's the continued argument of once someone's symptoms have settled, and they go back to their old gait or do they want to stay where they are? I answer that question in a similar way to the orthoses question, really, is that you don't see elite runners overstriding. And when you do some cadence manipulation with a runner, you often, once there's that initial washout period, you often make them more efficient because you optimize their stride length and cadence. So most of them don't want to go back because it feels quite alien because you've made them more efficient.
So until next week's episode, exploring kneecap pain and what we can do about it, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.